Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've talked a lot about PTSD, and there's one section of it that I have not yet been able to describe to you, and that's dissociative reactions. But I just want to make one or two little comments here before I start on dissociative reactions. There are a lot of people who have mental illness. They have mental illness or some kind of deep emotional responses to things. That does not make them dangerous. I've heard so many times when a person does something, well, they're mentally ill, they're not in control, and that means they're dangerous. I don't want you to get the idea that people who have emotional problems are dangerous. For the most part, they are not. Now, I've had a number of stalkers, and they can be dangerous, and some of them that I've had as stalkers have been suffering from some form of schizophrenia or paranoia. Now, there are different forms of schizophrenia, not all of them dangerous, but when you get into paranoid schizophrenia and illnesses like that, they can be. I mean, I had a guy when I was teaching college come into me, and this was the first day of class. It was an out-of-state college. I hadn't been there very long, but the first class he came into me, and he handed me a razor blade. He says, "I want you to keep this razor blade." And I says, "Why would I do that? Why do I need a razor blade?" He says, "I want you to defend yourself with it when I come to kill you." And he was a problem throughout the semester and ended up in a mental hospital. And then when he was released from the mental hospital, the problems continued because the first thing he did was try to call me. And he would call me weekly, 2 or 3 times a week, threatening, until finally they rigged up a phone system so that I would never get his calls. And they had police around to watch to see that he was not on campus. And they had a restraining order on him so he could not come on campus. And I had even students act as bodyguards for a while. And it was a completely dangerous situation. And that's happened to me 2 or 3 times. So there would be some elements of some mental illnesses that under certain circumstances could be dangerous. But I don't want you to think that as a general rule, people that have emotional problems are dangerous, because as a general rule, they are not. If they were, we wouldn't be able to see them as counselors unless we had special precautions. Most people who would have the propensity to be dangerous are probably seeing psychiatrists anyway, not counselors. So it isn't anything that you really have to worry about. I just want to let you know that. Now, in terms of dissociative reactions, if you are a bright person and you have been abused, you may decide, your mind may decide, you don't consciously make a decision, but your mind may decide to split off and become like another person for a while so you don't have to deal with the abuse. Now, I want to tell you a story. It's a true story. I was teaching at a college. I was professor of psychology at a college, and it was out of state. And I knew the staff members. They were great staff members. And I was working in my office, and outside of my office in the hallway, there was a conversation going on between one woman of the staff and another person on the staff. And they were just talking, and I was working in my office. I wasn't trying to overhear anything, and I wasn't in view of them. I couldn't see them, but I recognized their voices. Of course, I knew who they were. And then a man came on the scene and started talking to them, and all of a sudden, one of the staff members, their voice changed, the way that they were talking changed. They were talking like a little girl, not an adult, a little bit flirtatious, a bubbly, bouncy 10 or 11-year-old, very cheerful, but the voice was definitely not the same. The way that she spoke, the words that she used was altogether different. And I knew who she was, and I knew what had happened to her is that she was in the midst of a dissociative reaction, and she had, for a period of time, become like another person, because her voice had changed, the way that she talked had changed, her language had changed. Now, I would be willing to bet, if I was a betting person, that she didn't even know that happened. I would be willing to think that when certain people came on the scene, she changed the way that she approached them. And she was probably not even aware that she did it. And then when he left, she returned to her normal voice again without being aware of anything. This is when you change into somebody else, in a sense. She knew what was going on around her. It wasn't like she was out of contact with reality. She wasn't out of contact with reality, but her reality had changed enough so she became like another person. Now, I would just make some assumptions from this. I would assume that she was abused, or that she had some trauma in her life, either seen or experienced, and the way she got away from that was that her mind split off. It's not like she planned it that way. It's not like she wanted it to be that way. It's the fact that the mind does it. You have to be bright to do it. You can't do it if you're even average IQ, because what happens is that you put up with the stress of it. But a person who's creative, has a creative bent, has a lot of intelligence, their mind can decide to take that split. And they go into like a trance situation. And when they go into a trance situation, they change, and they're not aware of it at all. Now, in order to do therapy so that they can heal from that, you have to make friends. If you're the therapist, supposing I'm seeing somebody and they go into dissociative reactions like that, they become other personalities. I have to talk to the other personality when it presents itself. Some of these personalities are very well formed, very well defined, and even have their own names. In a serious dissociative reaction, you actually have the people that several personalities maybe, and they all have different names. And as I said last time, one personality is going to know all of them. This is a severe case of it now. It's like a spectrum disorder. A spectrum disorder is when there are degrees of it. Take autism as an example, and this is not a class on autism, but just to let you know, there are some autistic patients, they don't talk, they never talk. They can make noises, they can make sounds, maybe they can master a few words, but they can't take care of themselves at all. They're like imprisoned by their brain. The brain actually is structured differently and does not respond the same as a normal brain. If you take a scan of the brain, there are differences in the way the brain is structured. So it's a physical abnormality within the brain. But then there are some autistics that are very high functioning. They go to school, they go to college, they make friends. They may have a lot of difficulty in personal relationships because they don't understand what relationships are all about. They have difficulties that way, but they're very bright. Autistic people are very bright, but some of them function well and some of them don't. Well, in a dissociative reaction, some of them just phase off and they go into some kind of a trance and they become somebody else for a while, and then they come back again. In a more serious form, you have the multiple personality. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, but now it's called a dissociative identity disorder. But it's the same thing. This is where you depend upon the DSM because it catalogs all that for you. So they will come and they'll be like in a trance. They might, if I'm counseling them, have several personalities show up. And I will ask them to identify themselves. What is your name? I notice the voice has changed, the way that they talk has changed, everything's changed, so they become someone else. If it's well defined, I might be able to ask, what is your name? Oh, my name is Brenda. I'm just making that up. But my name is Brenda. And then they'll talk to me from their point of view. Sarah doesn't know you, but Brenda does. And you have like a conversation with a personality. For a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrists do a good job in healing these kinds of disorders, they have to make friends with every personality that a person has. And they give therapy to each personality as the personality approaches them, as they identify themselves and as they make themselves known. And then they heal that. and every personality that appears, they heal those personalities, and then they get back to the original person. So you never know what's going to happen in a counseling session, because you work with a person as they show themselves. And you don't know when that's going to happen. Now, I imagine some psychiatrists, when they get to know all the personalities, will ask for a personality to show themselves. Maybe they do in some instances, and then they work with that person. Now, what's going to happen after working with that person? You need to have every personality like you. You need to work with every personality, and then you take the best aspects of all of these personalities and you start to integrate them. That can be a little frightening for a person, because they're used to these personalities and they've become friends for the most part. I mean, I can think of exceptions, but let's say for the most part they become friends. And once they become friends, they don't want to lose them as friends. And so they kind of want to resist. So you have to reassure the patient that as they are healing, they're not really losing them, they're incorporating them. And if you do it from that point of view, then the real person becomes healed. And that's important. You need to have healing of this. And this a person can't do on their own. If a person has this, they don't know they have it until later on in the therapy, when the therapist gradually allows them to know that they're more than one. And they may have had a sense of that. What a patient will have is a sense of time lost. They get up and they're going to work, and suddenly they find themselves in another city. And they don't know how they got there. They don't remember how they got there. And what happened was another person took over, and they decided not to go to work. They decided to go to another city, hopped on a train or a bus or something and went to that other city. And when they come out of it, they have no knowledge of how they got there. They don't remember the transition between one personality and another personality. They just don't remember it. Later on in the therapy, they'll start to realize what's happening, and the therapist will help them to acknowledge that. Once in a while, you will get a person who has lost their identity, gone to another city, and been in that other personality for years before they come out of it. They get married, they get a job, they have children, they're living a whole nother lifestyle, while everybody back at home wonders whatever happened to them. They've disappeared. And then gradually they sometimes come out of it, and the poor wife and children realize they've been married and had another life in another city that they don't even remember. But those are very, very serious cases of it. For the most part, what you see is what I saw when I was working in my office. Somebody changes for a while and then comes back to what they were and has no recollection of the fact that they did it. If they have a recollection of something changing, if you were to ask them about it and say, you know, whenever you see this person, your voice changes, and it's like you don't act the same. They're not going to realize that's a mental disorder maybe, but they recognize that's going on. They might confront the person. And what the person will usually say is, well, you know, when I get interested in something, my voice changes. You know, it's like if I'm thirsty, I always get a Coke, or if I get stressed, I always get a headache. And they don't realize there's a psychiatric dimension to that. And it's just a part of their life. And people get used to it, and they don't think anything about it either. There are times when a person becomes quiet. I knew a person who had a dissociative disorder, and she did not speak, or spoke very, very little while she was in that state. Then she'd come out of it. And I used to talk with her, and for a while I wondered why she would suddenly get so quiet and wouldn't say anything. She was at that moment somewhere else. She was another person for that moment. And then when she got back to it, she was fine again. So it takes some skill in recognizing that this is a dissociative reaction. And if you have it, you don't need to be afraid of it. As you go into therapy, you'll gradually realize that you have it, and then it can be healed. So it's not anything to be afraid of. So, and I just want to just kind of reassure you, I think these reactions are a lot more common than what people realize they are. Anyone who is bright, who's seen trauma, who's experienced trauma, who has a horror of the trauma that they've had and has to get away from it is likely to develop some kind of a dissociative reaction in which they step out of it for a while and then they step back into it. It's known that young children who have been traumatized, they've been sexually abused, they can describe the fact that their minds aren't there and they go somewhere else. They create something like a compartmentalized personality. So as the abuse is occurring even, they don't really experience it because their mind is somewhere else. Now the mind is capable of doing that, and that is a dissociative reaction. It becomes a part of PTSD, which is why I want to talk about it. It, along with all the other symptoms that we've had, the anxiety, the depression, the dissociative reactions, the phobias, the fears, all of these other things, they're all a part of a dissociative, all a part of PTSD. Dissociation is a part of it too. You would not be a dissociative person unless you had abuse. To see it, to experience it, like a lot of these other reactions, you have to see it or you have to experience it. And then you become dissociative if you're bright enough to do it. And it can start in childhood, it can start later on in life, and it will continue for a long, long time unless a person gets help with it. And it can be disruptive, but for the most part, it's never dangerous. So I'm going to close it off here. We'll be doing something else next time. So please join me then.